Now let's talk about the reference section. The purpose of the reference section is to provide the reader with a list of all of your sources in alphabetical order. So this way, the reader can find the sources that you're citing and be able to look them up if they want more information. So everything that you cite in your paper must be listed in the reference section. So if you cite it in the paper, it must be listed in the reference section. And each reference must be presented in a very specific order. And the order of which you present these references will make it easier for the reader to find certain pieces of information. So let's talk about each of these pieces of information in the order in which it needs to be presented. So I'm going to give you a running example of one as I go through this. So the first thing you want to report is the last name of the first author, and then their first name, their middle name, and then an ampersand before the last author. So if there's two authors, the last name of the first author, their initials, comma, ampersand, last name of the second author, and initials. Just remember the ampersand comes before the last author. Um, the reason that the order is important is because the first author is the person who has contributed the most. So you want to make sure that that person gets their name listed first. So the ordering is important. It's not based upon the last name of the author in terms of alphabetical order. It's based upon contribution. So always take into account that the first author is the one who contributed the most. So for our example here, we have Lowry and then BS for his first and middle name, comma, ampersand, Wout, and then my first initial and middle initial. Next, you want to report the year of publication in parentheses followed by a period. So this particular article was published in 2010. So as you can see on our running example here at the bottom, now we add in our year of publication. Then you want to give the title of the actual article, right? And the important thing to remember is that only the first letter of the first word is capitalized, and then the first letter of any word after a colon or semicolon that gets capitalized. Everything else is lowercase. And then you follow that title with a period. So for our running example here, we now have included the title followed by a period. Then you want to report the title of the journal. Now, in contrast to the title of the article, the major words in the title of the journal should be capitalized. So for here, you can see the J in journal is capitalized, the P in personality, the S in social, the P in psychology, those are all capitalized. And importantly, the title of the journal should be in italics. So there's two things that are going to be in italics. This is the first of them, the title of the journal. So if you're looking at a running example here, we've now included the title of the journal in italics. And then next you have the volume number. And this is the other piece of information that needs to be in italics. So you report the volume number followed by a comma. So our running example here, we've now included 98 for our volume number followed by a comma. And then you report the page numbers followed by a period. So this was 956 to 966. And then if it's available to you, you should also report the DOI, which is the Digital Object Identifier. This is just a way in which it makes it easier for people to get an article from the internet. If they click that DOI number, it should take them directly to the article. So if the DOI number is available, you should also give that to the reader. And the D, O, and the I are all lowercase, and then followed by a colon, and then the actual DOI number. So for example here, we've included our DOI number at the end. One thing to remember about your reference section is that each reference needs to have a hanging indent. So the first line is going to be flush left, and each subsequent line is going to be indented 5 spaces. So just make sure that you have hanging indents for each of your references. Now, it might be tricky at times to be able to find all the information that you need to report. So I'm going to show you where to find most of this information. It will vary a little bit between journals, but almost all the journals are going to have the key information on the very first page of the article. So this is the published version of this article. So I'll help you find the information that you need to report. So first you need to report the authors, right? So the authors always go from top left to top right, and then bottom left to bottom right. So the first author here is going to be Lowry. Second author here would be Wout. If there was a third author, it would be below Lowry. And if there's a fourth author, it would be below Wout. So it just basically goes top left down to bottom right. So that's how you know the order. So you put Lowry, then his initials, Wout, my initials. The year is 2010, so that's reported up here. The title, obviously you can see that here. Again, the key is to remember that while the title, most of the words begin with an uppercase letter in the title in the actual journal, in the reference section, only the first word or any word after a colon are going to be in capitalized. So you can't just cut and paste this. You're going to end up doing it incorrectly. You're going to have to adjust it from the actual title in the journal to your reference section. It's not going to be the exact same thing. The journal here, again, remember that journal needs to be italicized. The volume number also has to be italicized. You do not need to include VOL, just the number itself in italics. The page number, and then you have the DOI number. And that's it. Now let's talk about in-text citations. In-text citations are when you're citing articles within your paper. And there are a few cases in which you need to use in-text citations. Definitely when you're describing a paper that you've read, trying to provide details on that paper. If you're making a claim or a statement of fact that you got from somewhere else, or if you're explaining an idea that you got from somewhere else. In any of those contexts, you're going to want to cite where you got that information from. The goal here is to make sure that you are not inadvertently plagiarizing and taking credit for something that you didn't do. And for in-text citations, all you need to include is the author's last name and the last names and the year of publication. And there are two ways to write in-text citations. The first is a narrative citation. This is when the author's name is incorporated into the text itself, and it's followed by parentheses. So like for the year. So Casson and Fong, and then the years in parentheses, demonstrated that training does not improve lie detection accuracy. So as you can see, the authors, Casson and Fong, are incorporated within the sentence itself, and then the year of publication is in parentheses. So that's the narrative citation approach. The parenthetical citation approach is when the author's names and publication date appear in parentheses at the end of the sentence. So, where the author's names are not incorporated into the sentence itself. So for this example, research demonstrates that training does not improve lie detection accuracy. Then you have Casson and Fong, 1999. Now, for the parenthetical, just make sure that you use the ampersand between before the last author. When you're writing in the narrative form, you'd use the actual word "and," but when you're using the parenthetical form, you want to have an ampersand before the last author's name. Now let's talk about when you're citing authors with articles with one or two authors. So if you have one or two authors, the very first time you cite them, you cite both authors. So for this example, we're using the parenthetical. Steele, ampersand, Aronson, 1995. And then any subsequent time you're citing Steele and Aronson, use the exact same format. Um, Either if you're using the more standard approach or the parenthetical approach, it's Steele and then Aronson, 1995. Now, when you have 3 to 5 authors, the very first time you are going to write out all the authors' names. So Major, Spencer, Smader, Wolf, and Crocker. But then every subsequent time after that, all you have to write is the first author and then this ETAL, which is et al., period, followed by a comma and the year of publication. So now you're basically saying Major and colleagues, and now you don't have to write out every person that was in that particular paper. Only the very first time you need to do that. Every subsequent time you can write et al. But do not write at all the very first time if you have 3 to 5 authors. You need to write out all the authors the very first time. Now, if you have 6 or more authors, you can go directly to et al. So you can say Casson et al. 2007 and not have to write out all 8 or 9 authors, just Casson. Then every subsequent time, you do the exact same thing. You just put Casson et al. 2007. So here's some additional APA issues that I want you to be aware of. First, when it comes to the font for the actual text, just stick with New Times Roman. Don't change much for that. 12-inch font for your tables and figures, which I don't require you to do, but if you were to do tables and figures, those typically are in Arial. Your spacing should be double spaced throughout. Don't add extra spaces. So double space for the entire paper. Even when you're changing sections, just keep it double spaced. Don't add an additional space. Even your reference section should be double spaced. Everything's double spaced. For the paragraphs, indent the first line of every paragraph by 1/2 inch. So just push tab and then you're good to go. For the text, you want to have left justified, which will leave the left side smooth going down, but the right side will be kind of jagged. It won't be smooth. So you don't want to have full justified where both the left and the right margins are smooth. That's not correct APA formatting. Just stick with left justified, which again is the default. So for most of these things, if you stick with the default, you're going to be fine. For spacing, you're going to have to change it to double space. But for the paragraphs, for the text, for the margins, which are 1 inch all the way around, those are all just the defaults. Just don't mess with that. And again, Times New Roman is also the default. So as long as you stick primarily with the defaults, except for your spacing, you should be fine. Acronyms, you are going to want to write out the acronym the very first time that you use it, and then the actual word itself, and then provide the acronym so people can link the actual words with the acronym. So at the bottom here, we have the State Trait Anxiety Inventory, and then we give the acronym STAI. Now you can just use STAI going forward, and the reader will know that the STAI stands for State Trait Anxiety Inventory. But you can't just write STAI and not link it to the actual words, because then the reader won't know oftentimes what that particular acronym stands for. And then just some basic writing issues. Try to use academic language to keep it very formal. Avoid slang. Don't use any kind of contradictions. Don't use abbreviations. Definitely pay attention to your tone and your tense. So don't change tone or tenses within a sentence. That's always a little bit problematic. Make sure that you stick with the parallelism. So if you're saying he or she, then you want to use his or her to kind of link that together. If you're talking about multiple people, you use them or their. Just make sure that your numbering is consistent. So if it's a singular, you want to use he, she, his, her. If it's plural, you want to use them, their. And don't